latest on the situation in Sudan. We can cross now to neighbouring Ethiopia and speak to Sudan expert Alex de Waal, who is the Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation and a Research Fellow at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. The Sudanese military says it is listening to the people, but the Sudanese people don't seem very convinced, do they?
And quite rightly too. This is, I think, one of the most incompetently mounted coups in modern history. Essentially, what has happened is that the senior lieutenants of President Bashir realized that he had to go, but their priority was to sort things out among themselves. They couldn't agree on how he should go, where he should go, and who should take over. So they made the announcement, which was greeted with cheers. Then they went silent for several hours while they decided who should come forward and make the announcement. And then what happened was that we saw that actually it is exactly the same old faces presenting themselves as a change. And the people of Sudan are not fooled by this. They see this as Bashirism without Bashir, and quite rightly so.
Yeah, okay, so they're not convinced principally because it's not a real change. It's not the overhaul they were demanding. It's more of the same, and they're concerned, aren't they, that the army isn't going to let go of the reins of power all that easily when it comes to the point that they have to hand over to a full civilian government.
The real problem, actually, is that in other Arab Spring revolutions, for example, in Tunisia and in Egypt and in Sudan's own popular uprisings, like in 1985, the army was the dominant force. And what was required was for an army officer, senior army officer, to take over and say, we are here, we're in control. The problem is that over the last 30 years, the Sudanese military security sector is not just the army. There are multiple other groups. In the capital itself, there's National Intelligence and Security Services, which have military power comparable to that of the army. And there are numerous paramilitary groups as well. So if the army were to take over on its own, it could face other groups saying, no, you don't represent us. And we could either see fighting in the streets or possibly provincial towns being taken over by groups that are not the army. And a kind of civil war, maybe akin to what happened in Libya or Yemen, developing. So the priority for the officers who taken over is not to respond to the protesters, but to respond to the power vacuum and to one another. And what we're seeing is a power struggle being played out behind closed doors in Khartoum as to who is in charge at the moment. And we really, really don't know.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about the opposition, but we're running out of time. I've got time for one more question. I want to ask you about President Omar al-Bashir, who apparently is not likely to be extradited, at least not on the watch of the military. Do you see that as something that could happen at a later stage? And what do you think the will of the Sudanese people is with regard to the future of their former president?
I think there's 2 points. One is, while the demonstrators were chanting and calling for Bashir to go, they very clearly didn't call for him to go to the ICC. They said, this is the issue is Sudan. He's just one man. They don't want to keep the future of Sudan hostage to one man, and that, I believe, will continue. And even if there is another government that comes, it needs to keep a reputation of keeping all the Sudanese on side, and that includes the very many Sudanese who were indeed loyal to Bashir or loyal to the military structures. And if he were to be cast to the wolves, to be handed over, that understanding would unravel. So I think it's very unlikely he will ever go to the ICC.
Okay, well, thank you so much for speaking to our Sudan expert, Alex de Waal. Thank you so much again.